Good morning, I'm Judy. I'm with Judy's ELDT training. Today we're going to pre-trip a Class B bus. We're going to do passenger only on this, so you won't see the school bus signs going, and we'll break it down into sections. Thank you for joining us. So this morning I have one of my A students here with me, Tony, and he's actually going to pre-trip the whole bus.
All right, as I approach the bus, first thing I want to look is to make sure the bus is not leaning, make sure there's nothing leaking, and then looking under to make sure that nothing is hanging down loose. I'm going to start at the top of the bus. I've got my three amber lights. They are properly mounted and secured. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation. There's no chips or no cracks in those. All my lettering is in place, not ripped, torn, or frayed. Again, passenger, so I will not be testing those for this test. The windshield is properly mounted and secured. It's clean, clear. There's no condensation. There's no chips. There's no cracks. The seals are properly mounted and secured. Nothing is worn, torn, frayed. I've got my windshield wipers, both arms, passenger and driver side, along with the blades. Everything is properly mounted and secured. Nothing is bent, broken. There's no bolts missing, and the blades are not worn, torn, or frayed. Again, working down through the hood is properly mounted and secured. I see no major damage, nothing that's cracked, damaged, loose, or leaking. My mirrors are properly mounted and secured, both driver side and passenger side. Nothing is bent, broken. There's no bolts missing. The glass is properly mounted and secured, not cracked, damaged, or loose. I've got my hood. My grill is properly mounted and secured. There's no obstructions that would impede airflow to the radiator. I've got my lights. I've got my turn signals, four-way flashers. They are amber in color. They're properly mounted and secured. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation, no chips, and no cracks. I've got my headlights, both high beams and low beams. Again, properly mounted and secured, clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, no cracks. Same thing on the driver's side, high and low beams, turn signals, four-way flashers, amber in color, white in color on both of those, which are proper. My bumper, the bumper is properly mounted and secured. It's not crack damage, it's not loose, there's no illegal welds, it's not bent, broken, or missing any bolts. My tag is properly displayed, it's properly mounted and secured. Again, not bent, broken, or missing any bolts. My inspection sticker is in date, November of 2023. My turn signals, four-way flashers, also running lights, both driver side and passenger side, are amber in color. They're properly mounted and secured. They're clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, and no cracks. All the DOT reflective material is in place, properly mounted and secured. Clean, clear, not worn, torn, or frayed, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. All right, now I'll move to under the hood for the under the hood inspection. I'm going to open my hood, make sure that the safety latches are in place, and I'll begin the inspection on the passenger side. Doing a general overview, looking at my hoses, looking at all my wires, just making sure that everything is properly mounted and secured, all the connectors are properly mounted and secured, that I see nothing ripped, torn, or frayed, or no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. This is my alternator. My alternator is belt driven. It is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, damaged, loose. The belt is properly mounted and secured. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts. It's not worn, torn, or frayed, and it's less than 3/4 inch play. All the wires and connectors going to the alternator are properly mounted and secured. Nothing, again, worn, torn, or frayed. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts. The water pump is belt driven as well. The water pump is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, damaged, loose, and I see no leaking. Again, the belt is properly mounted and secured, less than 3/4 inch play, and no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, nothing worn, torn, or frayed. My windshield wiper fluid reservoir is properly mounted and secured. It is at a correct operating level. The cap is properly mounted and secured. There's nothing cracked, damaged, loose, and I see no signs of leaking. All the hoses are properly mounted and secured. Nothing worn, torn, or frayed, and no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. My coolant reservoir is properly mounted and secured. It is at a correct operating level. The cap is properly mounted and secured. All hoses coming off are properly mounted and secured. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts. Nothing worn, torn, or frayed. All right, as we approach the driver's side, first thing I want to do is check my air hoses. The air hoses are properly mounted and secured. Nothing cracked, damaged, loose, and I hear no leaking. My power steering fluid reservoir is properly mounted and secured. It's at the correct operating level. The cap is properly mounted and secured. All hoses are properly mounted and secured. And it does attach to the power steering pump, which is gear driven. It's properly mounted and secured. Nothing cracked, damaged, loose, and I see no leaking. Also, my air compressor is gear driven. It's properly mounted and secured. Nothing cracked, damaged, loose, and I hear no leaking. So this is the engine oil, yellow cap. Engine off, I would check it by removing it, wiping it, putting it back in, pulling it out again, and making sure that the oil level was between the fill and full line, and add as needed. My automatic transmission is the red. With the engine running in neutral, I would remove it, wipe it, put it back in, pull it back out again, looking between the fill and the full, and add as needed. So again, just a general overview of all my hoses, my oil, my power steering, my air compressor. All right, now I'll move into the steering components. The steering components of this bus, I've got my steering shaft. It's properly mounted and secured, both top and bottom. The U joints are properly mounted and secured. Nothing is obstructed. It's not cracked, damaged, loose. There's no illegal welds. It hooks into the gearbox or the steering box here. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, damaged, loose. There's no illegal welds. All my hoses are properly mounted and secured. Nothing is worn, torn, or frayed. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts. And again, I see no leaking. I've got my pitman arm. My pitman arm is properly mounted and secured, both top and bottom. It's not bent, broken. It's not missing any bolts. Nothing is cracked, damaged, loose. There's no illegal welds. My drag link connects into my upper and lower control arms. They are properly mounted and secured. They're not bent, broken. They're not missing any bolts. They're not cracked, damaged, loose, or no illegal welds. I've got my drag link, my rear drag link. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken. It's not missing any bolts. It's not cracked, damaged, loose, or no illegal welds. I've got my tie rod ends properly mounted and secured. Or my tie rod, excuse me, properly mounted and secured, not cracked, damage. It's not loose. No illegal welds. Nothing is bent, broken, or missing any bolts. All are secured with caster nuts and cotter pins. And again, nothing missing, no bent, broken, or missing any bolts. Now we'll move into our suspension. We've got our front hanger. I've got my rear shackle. They are properly mounted and secured to the frame. They're not bent, they're not broken, they're not missing any bolts. I've got my leaf springs. The leaf springs are properly mounted and secured. They're not bent, they're not broken. They're not cracked, they're not damaged, they're not loose. There's no illegal welds, and they have not shifted. I've got my two U-bolts. The U-bolts are properly mounted and secured, not bent, broken, or missing any bolts. Nothing is cracked, damaged, loose, or no illegal welds. I've got my shock absorber. The shock absorber is properly mounted top and bottom. It's not cracked, damaged, it's not loose. The bushings are not leaking. And now I'll move into my brakes. All right, the brakes, I've got my two lines coming in. I've got my air line, also my ABS line. The lines are properly mounted and secured. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts. There's nothing worn, torn, or frayed. They connect to the brake chamber. The brake chamber is properly mounted and secured. I've got my slack adjuster and push rod properly mounted and secured, and I would test those by chocking the bus, making sure the brakes were released, and making sure that they did not move more than 1 inch. I've got my brake drum. My brake drum is properly mounted and secured. It's not crack damage. It's not loose. There's no illegal welds. Making sure there's no contaminants, and also making sure that my linings are not excessively worn or dangerously worn thin. We're going to begin our inspection on the tire. First thing I want to do is look on the inside of the wall or the tire. The tire is properly mounted to the rim. I'm making sure the sidewalls have no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. The tread is evenly worn, at least 4/32 on the front, making sure also that these are not recaps or regrooves. The outside of the tire, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. Again, it's securely mounted to the rim. Using a tire gauge, I would check the correct pressure to make sure that it's at the correct operating level. All right, checking my wheel, both inside and outside, making sure that it's not bent, it's not broken, making sure it's not crack, damage, loose, or there's no illegal welds. Again, the lug nuts properly mounted and secured. Each one is tight. There's no rust trails, no metal shavings. The holes are not distorted. The bolts are not distorted, indicating that it would be loose. This is my hub seal. It is properly mounted and secured. All bolts are properly mounted and secured, and I see no signs of leaking. While I'm here, I'll go ahead and check my mud flap. It is properly mounted and secured, and it is flexible. All right, now we'll start down the driver's side. One thing I do want to mention, we are doing this on a bus today. If you were in a dump truck or maybe a bus that have a driver's door, make sure you include that in your inspection. But today we'll be just going, and also the stop sign. We will not be mentioning that as we're not testing for the S endorsement. So as we work down, I'm just doing a general overview. The first thing I see is I've got my clearance lights up top. I've got an amber light prior to the wheel, and then a red light at the back. The lights are properly mounted and secured. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation, no chips, and no cracks. I've got my mirror. My mirror is properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken. It's not missing any bolts. All the glass is properly mounted and secured, and I'll check that from the inside. The driver's window is properly mounted and secured. Clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, no cracks. All seals are in place. This is my fuse panel. The door opens, it closes. The hinges are not bent, they're not broken, nothing is missing. No wires are exposed. I don't smell anything that would lead me to believe there's an electrical problem. I do have spare fuses in the bus, and I'll show you those later. This is the battery door. The door opens and closes. The hinges are not bent or broken. My tray is properly mounted and secured. All connectors are in place. I see no corrosion. This is my fuse panel as well, properly mounted and secured, nothing worn, torn, or frayed, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts.
I had it in an order that was easier.
Again, the stop sign is properly mounted and secured. Working my way back, I've got my amber turn signal, four-way flasher, properly mounted and secured. It's clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, and no cracks. My emergency exits are properly marked. All my windows are in place, properly mounted and secured, clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, no cracks, no illegal stickers. All my DOT reflection tape is properly mounted and secured in all locations. I've got my red reflector behind the wheels, my amber reflectors in front of the wheels. And while I'm here, I'll go ahead and inspect underneath the frame and all. All right, now I'll be moving under the bus. It's a good idea to remember if you get to the rear wheels to check underneath the bus so you don't forget it. We're going to start with our exhaust. The exhaust is properly mounted and secured. The hangers are properly mounted and secured. I see nothing that is crack damage, loose. I see no signs of leaking, which would be soot, carbon buildup, anything like that. The U-joint or the drive shaft. The drive shaft is properly mounted and secured. The hangers are properly mounted and secured. The drive shaft is not resting on the hangers. The U-bolts are not obstructed. Nothing crack, damage, loose. There's no illegal welds. I do see my air tanks. My air tanks are properly mounted and secured. All the hangers are properly mounted and secured. The hoses are properly mounted and secured. I see nothing that's crack, damage, loose, and I hear no leaking. The frame. I'm making sure that the frame is properly mounted and secured, that nothing is cracked, damaged, loose, that there's no illegal welds. Also looking to see that the body is mounted to the frame, both latitude, longitude, that all mounts are properly mounted, that I see no holes, no cracks, nothing that would give instability to the floor. Now remember, on the inspection, some will tell you you don't have to get under the bus. Personally, I feel like looking at the bus will ensure that you don't miss anything, but will get you in a habit of making sure if I look at it, if it's not right, I'm going to see it. So one of the things we're going to check is our brakes. Okay, I've got my 2 lines coming in, my air hose, also my ABS line. I've got my brake chambers. They're all properly mounted and secured. The clamps are properly mounted and secured. Again, they attach to the brake drum, which is properly mounted and secured. I'm making sure that they're not cracked, damaged, loose, or any illegal welds. I'm making sure there's no contaminants. And if I can see, I want to make sure that the linings are not dangerously worn or excessively worn thin. Also, while I'm under here, I'm going to check the suspension. So you've got your hangers, you've got your shackles, they're properly mounted and secured. You've got your leaf springs, which are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked, damaged, loose. There's no illegal welds, front and back, and we'll check the back in just a moment. Okay, we've moved behind the tire. It gives you a good view of your shock absorbers. They're properly mounted and secured both top and bottom. Nothing is cracked, damaged, loose. Nothing is leaking. I'm making sure that the bushings are properly mounted and secured, that the axle is properly mounted and secured, that the torsion bar is properly mounted and secured, and that it has not twisted. And at this time, I'll begin the inspection of the rear tires. All right, so now I want to check the tires. Now, obviously, what you're looking for in the rear is the same that you're looking for in the front. You're wanting to first make on the inside and outside that there's no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, that the tread is evenly worn. 2 30-seconds on the rear, and they can be recapped or re-grooved. We want to make sure they're properly mounted and seated to the rim, that the rim is not bent or broken. Now remember, inside and outside, front and back, if you can see that. The valve stem, remember you got 2, one for the outer tire, inner tire. We're making sure they're properly mounted and secured, making sure that they're capped, making sure that you don't hear any, so not cracked, damaged, loose, or leaking. Also with a tire pressure gauge, checking to make sure that it's at the correct operating level. The wheel, not cracked, damaged, loose, no illegal welds, not bent or broken, and then brings you to your bolts. Every lug nut is properly mounted and secured. There's no metal shavings, there's no rust trails. The holes are not distorted, leading me to believe that they are loose. The axle hub is properly mounted and secured. All the bolts are properly mounted and secured, nothing bent, broken, no missing bolts, and it's not cracked, damaged, loose, and there's no signs of leaking. Again, while I'm here, checking the mud flap to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, and make sure that it's flexible in the clearance. One thing I want to check is between the tires, making sure you have at least 3 inches of space, and looking and feeling to make sure there's no obstructions in those tires. And now we'll move to the rear of the bus. All right, as we begin our inspection on the rear of the bus, the first thing I want to do is just get a general overview. Again, looking to see if the bus is leaning, to see if there's anything leaking, any puddles underneath, and see if there's anything loose, any wires, anything that's hanging down that could be an obstruction. Back of the bus, first thing I notice, I've got my 3 clearance lights up top. They are red in color. They're properly mounted and secured. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation, no chips, no cracks. Just as a reminder, all my lettering is good. I'm not testing for the S endorsement. The glass is properly mounted and secured, clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, no cracks. All the seals are properly mounted and secured, not worn, torn, frayed. Nothing is missing. The door, the emergency door, is properly marked. It opens, it closes. The hinges are not bent, broken, nothing missing. This rear glass properly mounted and secured. All the seals are properly mounted and secured, not worn, torn, or frayed. As far as lights, I've got my amber turn signal 4-way flasher. I've got my red stop light, running light, stop light and running light. And then I've got my white reverse lights. All these lights are properly mounted and secured. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation, no chips, no cracks. I've got my DOT reflectors. They're red in color. They're not worn, torn, frayed, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. My tag is in date from November 24. It is properly mounted and secured. My tag light is properly mounted and secured, white in color, clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, no cracks. All my DOT stickers, reflective material is properly mounted and secured. Nothing is worn, torn, or frayed or ripped. I'm looking in. There's no obstructions, nothing in my exhaust. And my rear bumper is properly mounted and secured, not bent, broken, or missing any bolts. At this time, we'll work our way down the passenger side of this bus. All right, so as we move down the passenger side, one thing that we want to make note of is you may only draw one side or another. So the way we train, the way Miss Judy really wants us doing it, is to get in the habit of doing the whole bus every single time. And then that way, when you maybe only get the passenger side, you are comfortable in doing passenger, driver, back. It don't matter. You're ready for your exam. So the first thing we do is look for our clearance lights. Again, general overview, no major body damage. I've got my red clearance light after the wheel. I've got my amber clearance light before the wheel. And then at the front, I've got my amber clearance light, marker light. They are properly mounted and secured. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation. There's no chips, and there's no cracks. The emergency exits are clearly marked. All my windows are properly mounted and secured. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation. There's no chips. There's no cracks, and there's no illegal stickers. I've got my 4-way flasher, my turn signal. It is properly mounted and secured. It's clean, clear. There's no condensation, no chips, and no cracks. Got my load light. It's white in color, properly mounted and secured, clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, and no cracks. I got my DEF tank. The DEF tank is properly mounted and secured. The cap is properly mounted and secured. It does have the safety chain in place. If you look under, the mounts, the hangers, the cage is all properly mounted and secured. And it must be at least 1/8 level. All right, as we work our way back, I've got my DOT reflectors. They are properly mounted and secured. All my tape is properly mounted and secured. Amber before the wheels, red after the wheels. I would inspect everything on this side as far as the suspension, the brakes, the tires, the wheels, the same way that I did on the driver's side. The mud flap is flexible. Here's the big difference. Diesel fuel. The door, it opens and closes. The hinges are properly mounted and secured. Nothing is bent and broken. The cap is in place. The safety chain is in place. It does have a seal. And then just peek under, look under. As I look under, I see my tank. I see my cage. It's not cracked, damaged, loose. I see no signs of leaking. And it is properly mounted and secured. Our door. The door is properly mounted and secured. All the seals are properly mounted and secured. The glass is clean, clear. There's no condensation. There's no chips. There's no cracks. There's no illegal stickers. And while I'm here, the passenger side mirror, properly mounted and secured. Nothing bent, broken. It's not missing any bolts. The glass is properly mounted and secured. And at this time, we'll begin the inspection on the inside of the bus. No matter which test you draw, if you just get the engine or you get one side or maybe you get the whole bus, everybody testing the passenger endorsement will do the inside. Class B will do the inside. And so pay attention, take notes. Here we go. First thing I want to do is check my steps. My steps are properly mounted and secured. The tread is properly mounted and secured. You want to make sure that you come in with contact on the handrails. The handrails are properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or missing any bolts. I do have my load light properly mounted and secured. Clean, clear, no condensation, no chips, no cracks, and it is white in color. As I come up, I've got my fire extinguisher. My fire extinguisher is properly mounted and secured. It is green. It does have the pin in place, and it is in date. Also, safety equipment. I've got my triangles. My triangles are properly mounted and secured. They are 3 in there. I've also got my first aid kit and my body fluid. I've got my seatbelt cutter as well, and all of my registration and insurance cards are up to date. All right, we had to switch buses, but we're here. All the process is the same. So the first thing I'm gonna do is get in the driver's seat. I'm gonna check my seatbelt again, make sure that it's connected top and bottom, make sure that it latches and unlatches. We've got the key. Put the key in. I'm gonna turn it. I'm gonna do what they call the safe start. Okay, I'm looking at my gauge panel, make sure that my ABS light is off. My weight to start is off. I'm in neutral. My brake is on. I'm going to cover and start. All right, I'm going to go check all the inside. What I'm looking for is to make sure that my seats are connected to the frame and the frame to the floor. Also making sure that my floor is clear, that the tread is good, that I see no holes, nothing in the floor. Make sure the aisles are good and clean and clear. Again, my emergency exits were well marked. I'm going to open it, close it. As you heard, I do have the audible alarms. I've got my lights. They're white in color. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation, no chips, and no cracks. My emergency exits are clearly marked. I've got the window emergency exits. I've got the roof. I will ask if she would like me to demonstrate the roof, and no. So the windows are, the emergency exits do work, and again, the audible alarm. So next thing we'll do is get in the driver's seat and continue. Now that I'm back in my driver's seat, first thing I want to do, my windshield, it's properly mounted and secured. It's clean, clear. There's no condensation. There's no chips. There's no cracks. There's no illegal stickers. My mirrors are properly adjusted to me. They're clean, clear. There's no condensation. There's no chips, and there's no cracks. My passenger mirrors are properly mounted and secured. I can see all the seats, everything. My visor is properly mounted and secured. So now I'm just going to start checking everything. I'm going to start to my left and systematically work my way around. Fan works. Fan. My dome lights are working. Again, I don't have to worry about my emergency equipment or the stop because I'm not in a school bus. Left turn signal. Right turn signal. My high beams. My four-way flashers, my horn, my steering wheel, no more than 2 inches or 10 degrees of play. My oil pressure has came up to the correct operating level. My water temperature is climbing. My trance is climbing. My RPMs is operating level. My miles per hour is 0 because I'm not moving. My fuel, I've got a half a tank. My DEF level is full, and again, you want to make sure that you at least have an eighth of a tank. My air pressure, it's at above the 120 to 140 governor cutoff because I've heard it release. I'm going to check my defroster, and it is working. I'm going to check my door. My door does work. I'm just going to cycle through and make sure my transmission shifts gears. And it does. All right, we'll start with our headlights and marker lights, clearance lights. All right, high beam, left turn signal, right turn signal, four-way flasher. All right, if you'll start down the left of the bus, looking at my left turn signal. That's good. Clearance lights across the top. At the rear of the bus, the left turn signal, right turn signal, my clearance lights across the top, my four-way flashers, my brake lights. I'm going to start and put it in reverse. Please stay clear. If you'll go to the left or the right side, please. The marker lights across the top. My right turn signal. Good. And my four-way flasher on the right side. And then my load lights.
They're on.
Okay, very good. If you'll come back in, please. All right, our governor pressure of 120 to 140, we've done that. I've heard it release, so now I'll begin my air brake check. The first thing I want to do is turn the vehicle off. I'm going to turn it back to run. The wheels are chocked. I'm going to release the pressure, and I'm going to ask you to time for 60 seconds, and I want to make sure that I have no more than 2 PSI drop within 60 seconds. This is just the static brake test. All right, at the end of that 60 seconds, now I would do my applied test. So I'm going to apply the brake. I'm going to get the initial pressure drop, and now I'm watching to make sure that my pressure does not drop more than 3 PSI in 60 seconds. The timer is going. All right, so at the end of that 60 seconds, I did not get a drop. Now I'm going to fan my brakes. I'm fanning for the low pressure alarm. No less than 55 PSI should get audio and visual, which I do. And now I'm going to continue fanning the brakes, and between 40 and 20 PSI, the parking brake should release. All right, I do have it released. At this time, I'm going to start the bus back up. No lights are on. I can accelerate just a little bit to build the pressure. The next thing I want to do is to make sure that I build pressure from 80 to 100 within 45 seconds. So now we're watching, we're at 80, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. We're above 100 now, so we did meet that. The next part of the test is the tug test. The bus is secure. I'm going to open the door and go remove the chocks. All right, we've reached our governor cutoff of 120 to 140. Again, we've heard the pressure release. So the next part of the test is the tug test. The parking brake is on. I'm going to put it in drive. I'm going to give it some gas to ensure that the parking brake is holding, and it is holding. At this time, now we're going to test the service brake. I would ask you to hold on. What I'm going to do is put it in gear, release the parking brake. I'm going to accelerate to 5 miles an hour. I'm going to apply the brakes, making sure I don't pull to the left or to the right. All right, I'm at 5 miles an hour. I'm stopping. It did not pull to the left or right. My bus is secured. All right, this completed the pre-trip portion of the test. Keep in mind that we are in Tennessee, so everything that we've talked about today is per Tennessee CDL manual. If you're watching from another state, get a manual, know what your state requires. And again, we would encourage you, if you need training, to contact Judy's ELDT training and get signed up today. Thank you so much for watching today. And personally, I want to say, Judy, thank you. Our church recently bought a bus and found out we needed CDL. So you took a non-professional driver, and through your training, I feel like made a professional driver. And so thank you for your hard work. And I pray and hope that everybody that watches this has the same outcome. And as a personal, again, just recommendation, Judy's ELDT training based in Knoxville, Tennessee, but you're willing to travel.
I'm a travel trainer. I can go anywhere.
Anywhere. So, Judy's ELDT.com. The phone number is there. Give her a call. I promise you it'll be worth it. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.